Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brandon, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. And thank you as always to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, and following this journey with us. We are on the road to 2K, people, so keep helping us get there. We are almost there, less than 100 away, so keep growing this family with us. But yes, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title, we're going to be doing this series, and this is going to be an interesting type of theory or just series, okay? And what we're going to do in these are, as you can tell by the title, we're going to be doing a script review. So if you didn't know, recently Netflix and Stranger Things, they released the full complete scripts of seasons 1 and 2, and I have ordered them and I have received them and have already been reviewing this while watching the actual show, and let me tell you, there are a lot of differences. So what we're going to do is we're going to review this, and all we're going to do is I'm just going to point out some of these scenes from chapter 1, The Vanishing of Byers. That's what this theory is going to be about. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out each scene just in order, in timeline order of the event of the actual show. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how things are different, how there's some scenes that aren't in the show, and how there's some things that aren't in the script. So we're going to do this for every chapter, okay? At least for seasons 1 and 2, because seasons 3 and 4, those complete scripts actually do not release until December 9th. That's when they go on sale, and then they're going to be shipped out. So those won't be there basically until right before Christmas. So basically that means that when those scripts come in, part 1 of season 5 is already going to be released, and part 2 is about to be released right on Christmas. So those are going to come in right before that. So we're going to have to grind before this finale to try and do those reviews, but we're going to do it. So with all that being said, let's get right into this one, and I hope you guys like this one. It gets very interesting, trust me. So first things first, the very beginning intro, okay, right before we see the timestamp, right when we start to see that night sky, okay, there's a description in the script that doesn't kind of make sense to this show. Basically, the sound that we're supposed to be hearing, okay, in that intro, right before the timestamp comes up, apparently we're supposed to be hearing the sound of a growl of an unseen beast is how it's described in the script. So I found that very interesting, so just let me know your thoughts about that. But when we jump to Mike's house, okay, there's not much different in the script versus what happens in the show with that intro scientist, which I found very interesting. It's pretty on point. But when we jump to Mike's house, okay, this is what gets interesting, and this is where we get some character description, okay, a little bit more than we actually get in the show. Basically, we see the boys, right? But in the script, we actually get described their D&D roles, or at least what they're playing in this campaign, okay? So in the script, it's described that Mike, he is obviously playing as the dungeon master in this scenario. It doesn't give him his actual role in their party, okay? So that's what's very interesting. But basically, it also gives his character a description. And that being the de facto leader is how it's put in the script, okay? So that's how we're supposed to feel, and that's how Mike is supposed to be acting as an actor based off of this script, is that he's the leader of these boys in this group. And obviously we know that, but it's really cool to see it actually in words and described for, say, these actors, that this is what they were reading and how they were supposed to portray their role. It's very interesting. But when we jump to Lucas, okay, it says that he's playing as a knight, and it also gives his character description that he is very small, but his loud mouth makes up for it, which I found hilarious. And then we get to Dustin, okay, and this is kind of interesting, all right, because it says that he's playing as a dwarf, and we find that out later, same with Lucas in all of this, all right, but basically it says that his character description is fearful, and also that he's the least confident in this group, which we kind of see here. But in my opinion, we kind of only see it in this scenario and maybe at the very start of the show. But as this season progresses, that changes in Dustin, where he kind of becomes more confident on how to attack this, kind of after the compass thing. But let's just keep going, okay? Because this is where it gets interesting, because it describes Will that he is playing as a wizard, okay? Which I know in season 2, they describe his role in their party as a cleric, which a cleric and a wizard are two completely different things in D&D. Basically, a wizard is more destructive, and they use their power for power, basically, or to overtake things and use it for just whatever they choose to. But a cleric basically gets its power from another deity, is kind of how it's described, and it gets its power from something else, okay? It retrieves its power from something else. And basically, a cleric's role within a party or a group, okay, is basically to protect that group, okay? So in season season 2, how it's described as Will, and that's his role in this party, it kind of comes off that that's kind of like how Will should be, okay, that he loves this group and that he would be like that type of person. But it's very interesting that they describe it that he's playing as a wizard, and the only reason being is because of his character description here. It says that he's a soft, gentle, and delicate person. So basically, if you kind of put that together, he's playing in D&D as his role or his character as a wizard. He's kind of playing like the opposite of what his character's described as. He's playing as a more powerful role and someone who he maybe really isn't, okay, in an actual real life sense. So I found that very interesting. Just let me know your thoughts. But as we keep going with the show, okay, basically we start getting character descriptions that we don't necessarily receive in this show straight up. More specifically about Karen, Ted, and Nancy, okay? We know Nancy, okay, specifically is 16 years old, and that's her character description, okay? But what's interesting is when we meet Karen and Ted, it gives us an age range for them as well, okay? For Karen, it says that she's in her late 30s, which I found interesting, okay? But what's even more interesting and a little odd, okay, is that how it says Karen's in her late 30s. It doesn't give an exact age, right? But when we get to Ted, okay, specifically Ted's age is 45 years old, okay? It's very specific to 45 years old, which I found interesting, and you're gonna find that interesting too based off other characters. So let's just keep going, because the next scene we're gonna talk about is very interesting, and this is something where there's an extra line in the show that is not in the script, okay? And what I'm talking about is when we see Will and Dustin going home and riding their bikes, when it's just the two of them. Basically, everybody knows what happens in this scene, okay? Dustin challenges Will to a race and they bet on a comic, okay? But basically, when that happens, okay, and we see Will take off. But what's interesting about these lines is that I've also talked about these lines in a lot of other theories, which I found super fascinating. But the point is that in the show, Dustin basically says to Will, he goes, "Hey, I didn't say go," and then he ends up saying, "I'm gonna kill you." Well, in the script, those lines are not in the script, okay? It kind of just jumps from Will racing to when Dustin all of a sudden stops, and then Will yells, "I'm gonna take your X-Men 134." So I found that very interesting of why they would have added this into the show. Okay, so let me know your thoughts about that and what you think about that. But as we get to this next scene, people, okay, this is the famous scene where we see the figure in the road, okay, when Will sees this figure. And in the script, all it is described, and I'm a little disappointed at this description, but there's got to be a reason why it's so vague. All it's described in the script is that Will sees a tall figure in the middle of the road. It doesn't give any description about that. However, when he falls off the road, okay, is when it gets a little bit interesting, because it says that all of a sudden he hears sounds behind him, and it describes these sounds as guttural sounds, which is like a hoarse or like a back of the throat sounding sound. So that, in my opinion, people, is a little bit more human-like, if you ask me, right? It kind of sounds like they're trying to make it sound like it's having trouble talking or something like that. So let me know your thoughts. Because when we jump to Will getting into his house, okay, he gets into his house, he locks the door, and then he runs around the house calling for his mom and for Jonathan, right? So that's all pretty much descriptive. It's pretty much on point. But when Will goes to the window to look outside and sees that figure again, it specifically describes that he sees that figure again. So in the show, we already kind of get that vibe that that's what he's seeing, okay? But this confirms that what he saw on the road and what he sees right outside the front of his house is the same thing. They are not two different things at that point in time. But when he's looking outside of that window, okay, it basically says that we cannot tell what its features, okay? So we're not supposed to see exactly what it looks like, which is how it shows in the show. However, it gives a little bit of a description. It basically says that the proportions are off, its head is too large, it says its body is swollen, and it also has a twisted shape. So the twisted shape is what caught my eye about that, because if we think about a Demogorgon, okay, we really don't see a twisted shape. But when we meet Vecna, okay, in season 4, all right, if you ask me about, say, if we're thinking of a twisted shape of a body, as we know, Vecna's body and like the outside portion of his body is basically all those vines, people, and they are moving. So if you ask me, that sounds a little bit more twisted than, say, a Demogorgon, but that's just my opinion. So let me know your thought based off that description. But what's interesting here, people, is as we see when he's looking out and he sees that figure, it kind of steps forward and then all of a sudden Will gets scared and he runs to the phone, right? Well, in the script, it's a little bit different, okay? Because as he looks outside, basically it says that those clothes, the clotheslines that he sees in those clothes are blowing back and forth. And basically it says that he sees this, it gives the description, and then all of a sudden it says a gust of wind comes and blows the clothes in front of that figure or whatever he is seeing. And basically when the clothes blow away, this figure disappears, okay? And that does not happen in the show, which I found very interesting because that kind of gives it a little bit more of an idea that either this thing is moving very fast or if this thing is capable of vanishing and reappearing in different spots. So let me know your thoughts about that as well. It's blowing my mind, and this is just literally before the intro credits. That's how much there is. But as we know, okay, he sees that figure and then he runs to the phone, correct? So as he gets to the phone, this is what I found interesting, is that it's described the sound that he's hearing on the phone. It describes this as the same guttural sound that he just heard in the woods, okay? And we kind of get an idea of that, obviously. But seeing a confirmation that those things and those sounds are the same is what's very interesting to me, because in my opinion, that those sounds sound a little bit different, at least the one, maybe just because it's on a phone and there's frequency, you know, and electricity and all that shit. But it's interesting that it specifically says that it's the same sound he heard in the woods, all right? So just let me know your thoughts about that, because all of a sudden after that, it says that he hears this series of strange sounds, but then it has a description word, okay? And it basically says words, question mark. So it's basically trying to describe how Will should be feeling about what he's hearing, right? So he's trying to basically think that he's hearing the fact that it's kind of trying to make out words, or it sounds like it's trying to make out words, which is very interesting to me. But right after that, okay, when Will turns around the corner of the wall and he sees the shadow figure, or the figure, I'm going to call it, I shouldn't say a shadow figure, and there's a reason for that. But basically when he sees that figure in front of his door, and in the show, we see it go in front of the window, basically the head of it, correct? Well, in the script, okay, it's a little bit different again. Basically, in the script, it doesn't describe that the door has a window at the top of it, okay, which is very interesting, and that could have just been a set change, you know, set design change, whatever. But the point is that basically in the script, it describes that he sees the shadow of this figure, okay, from under the door, which I found interesting, that it's not that crazy of a change. But if you think about it, all right, based off description and all of that, basically Will would have not seen the head of something. He just would have saw the shadow from the feet of something based off of these two separate descriptions. So let me know your thoughts about that. I know it's not that crazy, but logically he would be seeing two separate things, okay? So it does kind of matter in a sense, but not too much. So just let me know your thoughts about that. Because real quickly, right before we jump to where Will is about to vanish in the shed, as we know, okay, as you know, if you've seen some of my other theories, I talk about it quite a lot, that there is a hand in the window, okay, outside of the Byers shed while Will is in there. That hand is on the outside of that window before he enters that shed, directly like when he enters that shed, okay? So it's already posted up there right when he walks in, and it's also there after he vanishes. So in a realistic sense, okay, the fact that they put that into the show, there is no description in this script about that, except right before this, okay, as the scene we're talking about, right when the door unlocks. Basically in the script, okay, it describes the door unlocking, it says the metal shrieks, but then it describes it as if it was opened by an invisible hand, is how it describes it. So I don't know if they use that description that they have in that script and use that to their advantage, to where they now, okay, incorporated, say, a hand that's very hard to see within this shot. So let me know your thoughts, and if you've seen my previous series and you know I've talked about that description kind of blew my mind, because I know that hand's there and a lot of people see it, some people have trouble seeing it, but the main point is that the fact that there's a description involving a hand right before he goes into that shed, that blew my mind, people. So as we get into the shed now, okay, like I said, there's no description about that hand in the window, which I found interesting, but pretty much everything is pretty much on point with this description. description until it tells us about the figure that comes up about behind Will, okay? Basically, this is the time where it doesn't describe it just as a figure, it describes it as a shadowed figure, okay? And I don't know if that has any importance, and obviously that it's behind him within the shadows, okay? But when we first see that figure, okay, basically that is on a dark road, correct? Okay, so no doubt in my mind that looks like a shadow as well, but there's got to be a reason why they don't describe both of these things, okay? Say the thing that's on the outside of the shed possibly, and now the thing that's on the inside. They describe one as just a figure, and then they describe this one as a shadowed figure. So I found that very interesting. Just let me know your thoughts about that as well. But after the intro credits, okay, as we know, we first meet Hopper, okay? But real quickly, they're on that news report, okay, on the television that we know is playing right before we see Hopper for the first time. Basically, that news reporter is talking about a surge of power outages that happened the night before, and that they contacted the water and electric company. That's what they say in the show. But, however, in the script, it says that they contacted the public service and gas company. So I don't know why they would have just changed that so nonchalant of a line, because basically all it is a news reporter on the TV, and it's a line that she says, okay? So it doesn't really seem like it should be that important, right? But it's interesting to me that they changed it in the script for a specific reason, from public service and gas to basically water and electric. So that's what we're hearing now. So I don't know why that's a change. Let me know your thoughts of why you think they would have changed that specifically. Because as we meet Hopper for the first time, we get his age description, okay? So keep track of these age descriptions. But basically Hopper, it says that he's in his early 40s, okay? And then it has a odd description, okay? And a lot of people have pointed this out about why Hopper wears something specifically, being his blue bracelet, okay? But basically in the script, it has that as his description, that he specifically wears a blue bracelet. So no doubt in my mind, that blue bracelet is going to have meaning to something in this show, and we have not really necessarily seen that yet. But my point is that the fact that they include that specifically in Hopper's description is extremely interesting. So let me know what you think about that as well. But when we see Hopper getting ready and we see him take those pills, okay, those pills that he normally takes, it gives us a description of exactly what he's taking, and it's called Tuinol, all right? And basically what he takes in the script is he takes a red cap and a blue cap, and in the show, those caps are just one single cap. It's a red and blue cap in one cap, but basically that is a Matrix reference, 100%. Take the red or the blue pill. So I don't know why they use that just specifically with Hopper, but the point is basically what Tuinol is it's a central nervous system depressant, or basically how Murray describes it as vodka, okay? That's what vodka does and why he drinks vodka. It's a central nervous system depressant, but it's treated for insomnia from what I'm seeing. And if you mix it with alcohol, okay, which we just saw that Hopper, there was a bunch of empty beer cans, correct, around Hopper's table. So if Hopper's hungover, mixing this with alcohol, one of the things that pointed out to me about this drug is that you can suffer memory loss from that. So I found that super interesting, because we know memory obviously is a huge thing in this show, and we obviously know that Hopper is included in the first Shadow origin story, being involved with some mysterious shit that has happened in Hawkins before. But within this episode and within this season, we get a lot of confusion based off of what they have created with the first Shadow origin story, and now trying to connect that with what these characters who are involved with that, how they know certain things, or why they don't know certain things, or why they don't mention certain things. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they work that into this season 5. But no doubt in my mind, the fact that he's taking a drug that he basically can suffer memory loss from, no doubt in my mind they could use that to their advantage. And they must have had this planned out 100% early on, about the fact that there could be memory loss or trouble remembering things in this show, especially in the final season, no doubt in my mind. But as we jump to meeting Joyce and Jonathan, okay, we get Jonathan, obviously we know is 16 years old. He's the same age as Nancy, but we get a character description about Joyce and her age. And it also says that she is in her late 30s. So the same as Karen and a little bit younger than Hopper, okay, which I found interesting. I mean, they could be very, very close in age. I mean, early 40s could be 40 and late 30s could be 39. But my point is, it's interesting that they are a little bit separate in age. However, if we keep rolling with this in character descriptions, okay, when we meet those asshole boys, Troy and James, okay, those two dickhead bullies, basically it gives us a character description that these boys are 14 years old. So they are older than our boys. I don't know if that was ever said in the show, but it's interesting to see that they are older than them and picking on younger kids. But when we meet Barb, okay, it also gives us her age description that she is also 16 years old, which we should know based off of her being Nancy's best friend. But when we meet the cops, okay, when we go to the police station, we meet Flo and the police officers, right? Basically, okay, this is where things get interesting because it has us that it describes that Callahan and Powell are there, all right? But it has it described as basically that they don't have any age description or description whatsoever. But what's interesting, people, is about Flo, okay? And just like Ted Wheeler having a specific age, Flo also has a specific age in this script, being 61 years old. So I do not know what to make of that, of why these two random characters, being Ted and Flo, have specific ages, okay? Especially when our main characters have just vague ages like late 40s or late 30s, early 40s, you know what I'm saying? But as we get to one of my favorite lines in this show, and I use it many, many times in the other theories, but as we get to this famous line, I am so happy that they did not use what they have written in this script. I'm going to tell you, if they used this, it would have not rolled off the tongue that the way this line does. Because as we know, people, as the scene continues, we know our boy Hopper says the famous line that mornings are for coffee and contemplation, Flo. Mornings are for coffee and contemplation. Well, in the script, people, they have this written the exact opposite way. It is literally listed as mornings are for contemplation and coffee. And that when I read that, it just irked my damn soul. It made me so mad, and I know it's the slightest change, but no doubt in my mind, thank you whoever decided to change that, because that line is one of my favorite lines. And if it was that, I literally probably wouldn't have remembered that line whatsoever. So great change to whoever changed that, whether it's the Duffer Brothers, whoever at Netflix, one of the writers, just whoever changed that line, thank you. But as we meet another character and another famous character in the show, being our boy Dr. Brenner, we get an age description here, people. And this age description has blown my mind, and I don't really understand it because what I was thinking was a lot different. So you got to let me know your thoughts. But the age description for Dr. Martin Brenner is just 40s, okay? And as we know, and we heard earlier, that Ted is 45, okay? So this does not say mid-40s. This just says 40s. And it does not also say late 40s or early 40s. So that is very confusing to me, but that kind of makes this sound as if he is not much older than Hopper, which kind of confuses me. So I need to know your thoughts about this, 100%. But these agents, okay, people, the agents that they are walking up and meeting Brenner, these are described as NSA agents, okay? So I don't know what to make of that. You let me know. I don't even know what that means. I probably should, and I probably look like a dumbass, but whatever. But my point is that's what it's described as. But when we get inside, this is when things get interesting, people, because the man who's talking to one of those agents, okay, the scientist, is literally in this described in this script as scientist number 1. It does not get given a name, and that's all it's described as. So I want to know your thoughts of who they might incorporate, maybe in season 5, if we go back to something like this, or back to memories about this, or the moment that this gate was created, okay, because that's what's about to be described here by our scientist number 1. And you might be very confused, but just keep watching, because as scientist number 1 is talking, all right, he is apparently talking to lead agent is how it's described. Again, no name, which is very interesting as well. But as they enter this room and they're about to be putting on these hazmat suits, it's listed that Brenner is in the room, scientist number 1 is in the room, that agents are in the room, and then a trio of soldiers is also with them, okay? And basically what they're about to be doing is going downstairs, okay, in that elevator to go witness the gate, what we know as the gate, okay? But it's described specifically, and we kind of get this idea in the show, but it's described that they are specifically retracing the path of the intro scientist, the guy who goes missing, gets sucked up in that elevator, right? So that's specifically what they described it as in the script, which I found very interesting. We kind of get that idea, but that is exactly what they are doing within this scene. And it basically describes what it's like. It says that the lights are dead as we see. It says spore-like particles are floating in the air, and it also says that there's a white fog, but it says that there are cracks in the cement, which I found interesting. And they're talking about the hallways at this point. So I don't know if I haven't reviewed this really quickly, but my point is I don't know if there are cracks in the hallway within this show. So that makes things very interesting of how powerful 11 created this gate, and if 11 is the one that specifically created this gate. And there's a reason for that, but we're going to be talking about that in a future chapter, okay? So just hold on to that. Keep that as a note if you are taking notes while you are watching this video, and if you don't have these scripts for yourself, take down notes of what I'm telling you, because this is the majority of the major things that are pointing out in the script that are either different or described, or we don't get description. So it gets very interesting, people. But as they get into this room, okay, people, where they see the gate, this is even more interesting because there is actually storyline here, more than what we actually see, and with scientist number 1, which is why I want to know your thoughts of who you think this scientist number 1 is going to end up being, because it makes it's very odd that they have it listed as this and they do not give this person a name. And there's a reason for that, because what this man says when they enter this room is he's the one who's describing to these agents about what happened the night that scientist, everything happened with that intro scientist. And he basically describes this, and he's looking at the observation window, okay, right above, for how they're looking down at this area. And he describes it that there was a Dr. Shepard and a Dr. Braun in the observation room. And then he also describes that there was a Dr. Wilkins and a Dr. Manning in the observation room, apparently working on something. He does not state that, but what he says next is that he says myself, as in scientist number 1, and Dr. Brenner were observing what they were doing. So that makes things very interesting, the fact that they have left that out of the show and why they don't use those names of scientists. And that even raises the question of why this man is listed as scientist number 1 and not given a name, when all of these other random scientists that I don't even know if we end up seeing for any reason, why they are not in there, okay? So this literally confuses me so much. So I need to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about that. Because as this scene continues, people, all right, when they look at this gate, okay, apparently the lead agent is the one who looks at the gate, and it describes this gate as the beating heart of a subterranean nightmare. So I'm going to leave that up for questions and comments. So you let me know what you think about that. There's a lot of different things that could possibly mean, but I want to know what you think about that. So I'm just going to leave that. I'm not going to let you know my thoughts about that. That is a question that we are going to talk about probably in another theory. But as it keeps describing this gate, okay, it describes how big it is. It says it's 12 feet in diameter, all right? And then it describes it and gives it a name of what this is described as in the script. And it describes this specifically as the Rift, okay? They later call it the Gate, okay? The characters in this show and our actors and all that. But in the script, it's described specifically as the Rift. So I'm going to leave that up for questions as well of what you think that could mean. Because there's not much to this next scene, okay, which I was very surprised about. It's very, very on point to the script. But this is the scene when we meet 11, all right? And all that really pointed out to me is that it gives us a description of 11's age being 12 years old. And we already kind of know that, especially now after the season 5 poster was released series with the missing Jane Hopper poster that has her birthday on it. But in this script, it specifically describes that Eleven's age is 12 years old, which I found very interesting. But like I said, there's not much more to this scene. It's very, very on point in this script. But what I found interesting, okay, people, is another age description being Benny Hammond, okay, our boy Benny. Basically, this describes Benny's age, all right, people, as late 40s, all right, so which logically means how they have Brenner's age described in this script, that Benny is supposed to be older than Dr. Martin Brenner, which blew my mind, people. So let's leave that one up for questions. I don't know what to make of that. Seeing these age descriptions and how certain ones are specific, being Flo and Ted, and now we're getting all of these vague age descriptions, but Brenner is placed basically younger than Benny Hammond, which I found very, very interesting. So let me know your thoughts about that as well. Because as we jump into our school scene, we meet another miraculous character that we just did our last theory based off of, our boy, Mr. Clark. And it says that he is in his 30s, okay? So kind of like Brenner, how he's in his 40s, it just is a vague answer based off of that he is in his 30s. So let me know what you think about that. But his first lines, okay, that he ever says is a big part of what we just did his theory based off of, all right? But in this script, it's different, people. All he ends up saying in his first line is the whole part about to finish chapter 12 and answer 12.3 on the difference between experiment and the other forms of science investigation. But that's where it stops, okay? And Mike apparently walks up to him and says, "Did it come?" All right, that's how the scene is in the script. But in the show, as we know, there is obviously a part left out, and I want to know why and what significance that has. And that is going to be the major part of our Mr. Clark theory part 2. So I don't know if I caught something, but the fact that this is not in the script, and what I'm talking about is right after that, he says that the test will be on chapters 10 through 12 and it will be multiple choice with an essay section. So that part specifically is left out of the script. So I don't know if I caught something in that Mr. Clark theory, but we're definitely going to do a part 2 of that. I have a lot of theories planned, but I'm going to get working on that one, especially now after noticing that script change, all right? So especially comparing it to the show, it just blew my mind that we just recently did this. I just got these scripts and I see that. So let me know what you think about that. And if you have not checked that theory out, go check that one out. Because the next scene we're going to talk about, all right, people, we're going to skip past when the boys end up going to the AV room. There's not much different there. It's pretty on point. And then when they go and meet Hopper, it's pretty on point as well. But more specifically in the principal's office, okay, when they're talking about Mirkwood, they're pretty on point in that script. It's almost identical, okay? But the thing that's interesting, people, is when we see the famous flashback, okay, with Joyce and Will in Castle Byers, all right? That scene and the present scene, okay, when it flashes back to the present moment with her and Jonathan looking for Will, both of those parts are not in the script whatsoever. So that is something we are going to do a full-on theory about and try and figure out why that is not included in the season 1 script. And if that is, obviously there's a script for this somewhere, but why is this not in a complete script? And that's how this book is listed and what is being sold. So if this is the complete script, there's literally got to be a reason why that part, it's such a famous part that they also used in the season 5 teaser trailer, people. So there's got to be a reason why this is not in the script and why this is an extra scene in this chapter. But more importantly, let me know what you think about that, because the fact that that's not in there, that's got to mean something, people. And that script is somewhere. There's a lot of lines within that, and it's a whole scene that is very, very well known. It's the whole poltergeist scene. So the fact that's not in the script just blew my mind, people. So let me know your thoughts. Because the next scene we're going to talk about, all right, is when Hopper ends up finding Will's bike. And there's only one kind of interesting thing here, people, and it's something that Hopper apparently takes a note of. And basically, when he finds that bike, he apparently looks at a tree that has scraped bark, is how it describes. And Hopper apparently takes either a mental note or a physical note. It just says he notes this. So, no doubt in my mind, that's very interesting. And I think they might use that specifically when Jonathan's taking pictures pictures, they might mix what happens there and what Jonathan takes a picture of later, how he takes a picture of like that random tree with bark. That definitely could be something. So just let me know your thoughts about that. But right after this, right before this scene closes out, basically Hopper has an extra line, and he basically tells the other cops from what they're assuming. He says he must have been in a hurry, or he was in a hurry, talking about Will. So that these cops in this moment should know that something more is going on here, which they obviously do. But the fact that they just take out certain lines and there's extra lines, and how there's obviously missing flashback scenes, something is odd about these scripts, and I'm gonna catch this shit, people. You have no idea. I've been analyzing this show for the past year, and now that I have these, it's opening my mind to why certain things are the way they are, and I just need to know your thoughts about all of this, people. But this next scene is where things get a little bit interesting, people, because this is when the agents, we see them listening in on the town, and it specifically says that they are spying on the town of Hawkins. And basically, we get some storyline of what they are actually hearing, okay? And it says that one of the agents hears a parent, and we hear that they are going to the store. And then it says we hear another person listed as a teacher. It's saying that they would be home by ... And then all of a sudden, this is where it gets very interesting, in my opinion, just because of a name that's mentioned. It basically says that we hear an office worker basically saying, meeting with Tom in 10. And that blew my mind, because there is a big character in this show, okay, being Tom Holloway from season 3, who is in charge of the Hawkins Post, and we basically see all of those men in a meeting room, okay, specifically in a meeting room when they are at work, all right? So that's very interesting, in my opinion. So let me know your thoughts about that, and let me know if you think that that Tom is the same Tom that we end up seeing in season 3, and if they could use that to their advantage in season 5 for any reason. That would be amazing, and if you ask me. Because this next scene, all right, this famous scene when Hopper ends up going to the Byers' house and showing them Will's bike, and he's investigating, this is where things blew my mind, all right? Because there's an entire scene in this script that is not in this show, all right? Because as we know, this scene entails, all right, Hopper ends up investigating the house, he sees the hole in the wall, and then he goes outside because he hears the dog, right? But what we see is Joyce walk the dog in, and then Hopper instantly goes into the shed. However, there is a cut scene, and I'm going to call it the cut scene, because this scene is not in the show whatsoever, and there's an entire scene in this script. Basically, all I can do is describe it to you, but just imagine this for a moment, that basically those other two cops, being Callahan and Powell, are inside while Hopper and Joyce walk outside. And they are inside looking for evidence, okay? Is specifically in Jonathan's room. And Jonathan is also watching them while they are doing this. Apparently, Powell looks under Jonathan's bed, and Jonathan even has an entire line saying, "What are you guys exactly looking for?" But the cops ignore them in this scene. And then basically that Callahan cop, the goofy one that everyone loves, basically he looks at his Jonathan's Evil Dead poster, okay? Which is, I found very, very interesting. And he says, "What's going on here?" And Jonathan basically tells him, okay, that the tree on the poster is possessed, and it's going inside of the girl who is also on that poster. And basically the cop Callahan, all he says to Jonathan, he goes, "Yeesh." And then Powell interrupts him and basically asks Jonathan to get him a drink or some juice or something. And basically right when Jonathan walks out of this room, Callahan looks at Powell and says, "Did you notice that?" And Powell doesn't know what he's talking about. And this is the most miraculous thing that I cannot believe they did not include in this show. But Callahan basically tells Powell, to the other cop, he tells him, he calls Jonathan suspect number 1. Am I right? So I need to know your thoughts about that entire cutscene. So just try and imagine that happening, that while we see Hopper and Joyce walk outside and interact with the dog, that this is happening, okay? Also while Hopper is in this shed. So that's very interesting. And it's also interesting that we don't really hear where Joyce is in this moment. So obviously she's just inside the house. But the fact that they call Jonathan, and there's an entire scene basically calling Jonathan a suspect in this whole entire investigation, or at least to these two other cops, that just blew my mind. So let me know your thoughts, people. because this next scene is going to blow your mind even more, because as we get to this famous scene where there's so much confusion and unanswered questions, well, in this script there's some answers, people, and I am so happy that there are, because when Hopper goes into this shed and we know that he ends up seeing something, we don't end up seeing what he sees, right? And we get no answers. Well, in this script, it basically describes that Hopper ends up going in there, okay? And he ends up, the light goes out, okay? He sees the rifle and all that shit. But basically when he starts hearing that sound, okay, he hears something behind him. And it describes it that he hears like a growl, okay? So what's very interesting about this, people, is that when the fact that he starts hearing this growl, and it describes it that it starts getting louder and louder, and Hopper turns on his flashlight and starts scanning the shed. And apparently Hopper looks in that area how we see him, and when he looks in there, it gets louder and louder, and apparently a shadowed figure starts to approach him, which scares him, and he ends up going to pull out his gun, people. And then that's when Callahan ends up walking in and interrupting the scenario. So you let me know what you think about that, because that fucking blew my mind, people. Yes, I'm excited because that's insane. The fact that we get no answers, and that it was just released by Netflix and Stranger Things for us to now read. That this is what Hopper was seeing, is that he had something happen to him where he saw something coming at him that was growling. So I need to know your thoughts about that. That is huge, people. It is absolutely insane that they just released this to us, and they released to us before season 5. So no doubt in my mind, they have to show that to us in season 5. They have to explain that, especially for people who don't end up getting these scripts. It makes no sense. So I hope we see that in season 5, but let me know your thoughts. Because, hold on, oh shit, I actually forgot. There's more to this scene, people, because Hopper has lines, all right? Because Hopper didn't know what he was hearing, and the fact that he's hearing growling, okay, all of a sudden, Hopper has a line that he thinks that this is the Byers dog, because he has a line and it says, "Is that you, buddy? Are you hungry?" Okay, and then that's when all of this entails. And I wanted to leave that in till after, because I wanted to see if anybody commented right away and timestamped it. But no doubt in my mind, there is something odd about this, people. So once again, let me know your thoughts. That's why I held off, because that's even bigger than what I just described. So let me know your thoughts, because we're going to just keep rolling with this one, all right? Because right after that, this one's not too crazy, and I don't mean to disappoint. But when we get to the Wheeler's house and we see them at dinner, okay, and basically Nancy, she's asking to go and study with Barb, we get a little bit more to what she's talking about here. Basically what she's asking her mom, and everything happens, it's basically almost the same, but there's an extra line that Nancy says, because when she gets mad about it, she kind of just gets annoyed, and she says, "But Barb only lives 2 minutes away." So I found that interesting, because I don't think we ever really get an example or a description of where Barb lives necessarily. We know she lives in Hawkins, but I don't ever think we get an idea of how far she lives from Nancy and all that shit. So that's very interesting to this, in my opinion. And I don't know if we're going to end up seeing like the Hollands in season 5. Maybe we will, and I don't know if we're going to see Barb in season 5 either. I hope we see something involving Barb in season 5 for sure. So let me know your thoughts about that as well. But the point I'm trying to make here, people, is that this gives a description of location, and that's important to this show, no doubt in my mind, because this next scene is going to blow your mind even more. I know that last one wasn't too crazy, but this next one is even crazier, and it involves our boy Mr. Clark and Hopper when they are meeting, okay, during the watch party. We know this famous scene because Hopper ends up starting to describe his daughter, talk about his daughter, right? Well, the thing about that, people, is there's more to this scene involving Mr. Clark and Hopper, and there's proof that they do not know each other, people. And yes, that might sound confusing, but basically Mr. Clark asks Hopper, he asks him, "So you're local?" ? And Hopper ends up saying, I was in the class of 58, or he just says class of 58. And basically Mr. Clark responds and he says class of 62, just missed each other. So I don't know what to make of that, people, but that gives age description and that makes things very interesting. But the thing that's even more weird about that, why Mr. Clark asked if he's local, okay? Does that mean Mr. Clark doesn't necessarily live in Hawkins? Or that he just doesn't know the chief of police of Hawkins? Because that makes no fucking sense to me. Now, I don't know if you thought about that before I said that, but my point is that him asking if he's local, that obviously means that he does not know that Jim Hopper is the chief of police, which is very confusing. Or, like I said, logically, that just kind of proves that Mr. Clark does not live in Hawkins. So let me know your thoughts about that. Because this next scene is the famous scene when Eleven and Benny are at the Benny's Burgers, okay, and when that Connie lady comes in and she ends up killing our boy Benny, all right? All that's interesting about this is there's not much. It's pretty on point, but it gives an age description of Connie, and it's the same as Brenner's. It says 40s. But the part that's interesting, actually, is that when Eleven ends up running away and she meets those two agents by the back door and they stop her, okay, it gets a little odd here based off of this description. The first thing that it says is that these agents pull out electrical shocking sticks, okay? Specifically sticks and not guns, like it looks like they have stun guns or tasers. But the thing about that is there's a comparison, say, to season 3 when we see Erica and Dustin in Starcore in the Russian base, okay? Erica starts messing with Dustin, all right? With what, people? An electrical shocking stick. And that is connected directly to the Demogorgon. So I thought that was very interesting that they describe this scene and that device that they're using, and it's different in the show, obviously, but it's very interesting that they probably use that connection all the way in season 3 as well. But what's even more interesting is after Eleven ends up killing these men, and that's how it's described in that these men are now dead, okay? But when Brenner and the other agents end up witnessing this, it describes that these men have their bones are twisted, okay, and their heads are bleeding. So that just blew my mind, the bones twisted part, okay, because I don't think we necessarily see that, okay, involving Eleven. Even when we see her later kill Connie, how she kind of kills them like Vecna does with his victims, but we don't see the bones twisting and all that shit from what I remember. But that just blew my mind when I read that, okay, and that's what this is supposed to look like. Obviously, it doesn't look like that in the show, people, but the point is how it's described in the script and how they leave this described in the script, that just blew my mind. And that gives a little deeper connection to Eleven and Vecna and kind of what they do specifically. And I don't want to compare the two that way, but that's very interesting. So let me know your thoughts. Because as we get to one of our last scenes, people, all right, and I hope you guys like this one. This was very interesting. We're going to do this with every chapter. But as we get to this last scene, all right, is when Joyce and Jonathan are looking at photos. And it has descriptions of what they're looking at, which I found interesting. And basically it says that there are a lot of photos of Joyce and Will. But then it says that there are also many of the town and people who live there. And it says that they were artfully taken by Jonathan. So now I'm going to put this on you, all right? Do you think that they could use this to their advantage in season 5? The fact that Jonathan has photos of townspeople, just random people, and also just pictures of the town. We know that Eleven looks at photos to connect to certain things, but do you think that they could use these photos? And do you think that Jonathan might unknowingly have a specific photo of somebody that they need, and they could use this scene and this box of photos to their advantage? I'm going to leave that up for questions, but let me know your thoughts about that as well. Because as we come to a close with our final scene, all right, there's not much weird about that. Will enjoy hearing shit over the phone that happens directly after that, which I found very interesting, okay? But the thing that's even more interesting, all right, is how I've talked about in other theories at this very end scene when the boys end up meeting Eleven, okay? Right when Mike is hearing something, okay? In this scene in the show, they show it like Mike and the boys look one way and hear something in one direction, and then all of a sudden they hear something behind them and turn around, and that's when they meet 11. And I've talked about it multiple times that it always comes off like there's two things there, and then they end up meeting 11 second. So I want to put this on you because this is how it's described, all right? It doesn't describe it as two things, but it does describe it that the boys see or feel a shadowed figure dart behind them, and then they turn around to reveal 11. So that's how it's described. It doesn't describe the 11 as the shadowed figure. So I found that very interesting. And the only other mention, as we've mentioned earlier, is that when they talk about a shadowed figure is whatever was in that shed with Will Byers is described specifically as a shadowed figure to us. So I found that extremely interesting. But let me know your thoughts about every single thing we talked about here. This was the first script review of many, and this was chapter 1, The Vanishing of Will Byers, the entire episode of everything that really pointed out to me that I wanted to put out there for you if you don't have the capability of getting these scripts for yourself. But it blew my mind, all of these differences, the fact that there's certain scenes not included, there's extra scenes, there's scenes omitted out of the script. It's just wild to witness how much things change. But what's even more interesting to me is how things turn into what they are. Like reading this script while watching this show and just kind of pausing at certain parts and reading it and then rewatching, it blew my mind to see something that is literally started as words come into a picture like this. And especially a show that I have created my own YouTube channel that other channels have based their careers off of, okay? And basically, the world has fell in love with this show based off of these words. It makes me emotional in a way. I'm not gonna fucking cry, but my point is it's just wild, people, to actually like read these words and understand and know how it turned into what it is and how much we love this beloved show of Stranger Things. I call it that all the time. But more importantly, I hope you guys like this one. This was the first of many script reviews, like I said, but more importantly, keep subscribing, liking, following this journey, and you guys already know we out.